this and to other wars. And I'm going to start with a short poem. Guns roaring, bullets soaring, people dying, others crying. No one's laughing, this is war. Bloody ground, awful sounds, life or death, no breath. No one's laughing, this is war. War is bad, and therefore there should not be any war. So we must all get along and sing a very friendly song. When I wrote this poem at the age of 10, I did not understand how murder could be viewed as the most heinous crime a person can commit, but going to war could be viewed as a necessary evil. How could killing in one context be okay, but not in another? Almost 28 years later, even after I've gained some knowledge about the military-industrial complex, nation states, and so forth, I'm not sure that my views have really changed that significantly. By looking at the Plains of Abraham and other warfare from a social psychological perspective, however, we can gain some insights into how war may be justified by politicians, soldiers, and civilians alike. One important factor is nationalism. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham was a battle between Britain and France. These two countries have different languages, different cultural traditions, and different customs. National identification can provide the members of a society with a sense of belongingness, but it can also foster an us versus them, or in-group, out-group mentality. When one group of people views themselves as fundamentally different from another group, or even demonizes or belittles the other group, it becomes much easier to rationalize killing them. Moreover, strong allegiance to one's nation may make people more willing to die for what they perceive as the greater good, that is, the prosperity of their country. A second social psychological construct related to the justification of war is the glorification of the warrior. The archetype of the warrior as noble, brave, and strong has been a part of the collective unconscious for thousands of years. Therefore, people may not only be willing to kill and be killed for their countries, but also due to the virtuousness bestowed upon them as warriors. So these are just a couple of many social psychological issues related to war and the justification thereof. And now I'll turn it over to Trish, who's going to talk about more of the individual psychological issues.
Okay. So can anyone think of a major individual psychological consequence of war?
Post-traumatic stress.
That's the one. Perfect, thank you. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Does anyone know of any of the symptoms of PTSD? Just call them out.
Hallucinations.
Yeah, I was thinking of the hallucinations one. I think that's sort of flashbacks to the trauma.
Flashbacks is what I meant.
Yeah,
yes.
and sometimes it does sort of manifest in the present, and it looks like hallucinations.
Yeah, I did mean.
Yeah, that's what I thought you might be getting at. Yeah, exactly. And I didn't get a chance to do my research before doing this presentation because I didn't realize I was doing it until a couple hours ago. So I don't know if that's a TV portrayal of PTSD or if the flashbacks really do superimpose that strongly onto reality or not. But that is one aspect of PTSD, is the flashbacks to the traumatic event. Hypervigilation or hypervigilance, just being very nervous in your environment. One more that I'll just throw out there, nightmares. You probably are all aware of most of these already. Now, how this relates to this war and other wars as well. And again, I didn't get a chance to research this for sure. I'm pretty sure I'm accurate about this research, but just for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to tell you about it. Some research was done that showed that PTSD in wars like, say, World War II, for example, which is by some considered a justified war, ending the Holocaust. It was a productive war, a war that needed to happen, a war that people were glad to have fought or had others fight. There was a positive consequence, something that they believed in was a right and good thing to do, even though it's a horrific circumstance. That is a justified war as opposed to a non-justified war, and these are my terms, not anybody else's. Justified, non-justified. A non-justified war is a war that might be politically motivated for the gain or transfer of power between countries. Some would consider the war, the Iraq War, the war in the Middle East that we're in now, a non-justified war. It's basically for the greater good and power of certain political figures and not really any use to citizens of any of the countries. It's thought, I believe this research showed that PTSD rates are lower in justified wars than PTSD rates in non-justified wars. This would be considered a non-justified war, I believe. I don't know about the history of this one, but I've been told by my brilliant colleagues that this would be considered a non-justified war because it was for the political gain or power of certain nations over others. Yeah, and that was how I tied in the psychological aspects into the war of history and tie that into a little bit to the wars of today.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Trish, for putting our vast nation on the psychoanalyst's couch for us all. But yes, I mean, exactly, right? How do we tie, what relevance does this have for us today? This is a depiction of one of the founding events of our great and prosperous nation. However, we've already seen how by looking into it, by plumbing the depths of it and deconstructing some of the images, that this truth starts to destabilize. What have we learned from this image? Well, first of all, who are the main players in this image at the time? Well, of course, the English, and who else? The French. Pardon? Okay, and the Mohawk, and we'll just say the First Nations.
Yeah, I guess
Okay, so what were the consequences of this event for these different groups, right? We know that, of course, after this event, this took place in 1759, but the Battle for Quebec raged on for another 4 years or so, until 1763, when the British finally took over for good from New France and began Canada, English Canada as we know it is today. And the founding document for that was the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Okay? Now this document is extremely important. Is anyone here familiar with that document? Okay. It could be said it was essentially the first constitution of Canada, though it really wasn't a constitution. And there are a few points about it. It really established, it really organized the land distribution in North America, or present-day Canada and the United States, right? But what it also did was, really it was a tool, a document of colonization, where the Crown was able to claim indigenous lands. But within that document, there is also enshrined the protection of Native rights and certain Native lands, right, that were allocated to First Nations people. Does anyone see any irony in that kind of document? Okay, I'll explain a bit further and we'll see if that irony starts to become clearer. Before we get to that, of course, there's the Quebec question, right? We're all familiar, of course, with the tensions between English and French Canada and the history of Quebec separatism, or I'm assuming that some of us are familiar with the issue of Quebec separatism, all the way to, because of course after this, Quebec, the French were essentially subjugated by the English. Despite there being, a number of, powerful Quebecois politicians, tensions between the English and the Quebecois have been volatile, to say the least, culminating in the 1970 FLQ crisis, and all the way to the present day, really, in 2009, as Gail mentioned at the beginning. In 2009, of course, why was 2009 significant? The year 2009 significant to Canada? This is to check to see how...
It's the anniversary of the founding of Quebec City, isn't it?
Okay, well, there's that, but actually, coming from your group who taught us how to count math, what would be the significance of 2009 to this painting?
350.
Pardon?
To 350.
250, right? 2009 marked the 250th anniversary of this event. And they wanted to, of course, reenact the event on the Plains of Abraham. But certain Quebecois groups threatened to set off explosions, to set off bombs at the event if it were to be carried out, right? And as a result, the government canceled the event, right? Canceled such an important event. It just goes to show like how, you know, although the event happened so long ago, how it still really lives with us today, how volatile and divisive an issue this is between the Quebecois and the English Canadians. As for First Nations people, of course, the Royal Proclamation that occurred after these events, or that was really becomes the main document in which Native rights are enshrined. And it's such an important document that in 1982, of course, why is 1982 important for Canada? Yeah, this is the year that Canada got its own constitution, right? There was much fear from Native groups, though, that because the 1763 document was so important, because there was just that little toehold that protected Native rights and Native land claims, that not be replaced, right? So the 1982 Constitution Act has a section, you know, which guarantees that Native rights won't be diminished as recognized in the 1763 document, right? So again, for the other major group, right, the English, the French, and of course the First Nations, for the First Nations, the consequences, the immediate aftermath of this event still lives with us today as well. So again, just to reiterate, how such an event like this, when we're talking about capturing the image of the truth of Canada, and you know, we started off with, you know, some ideas or concepts of Canada. Some of them might begin to change after, you know, exploring some of this history. But again, just to emphasize how our historical origins are still really vibrantly still with us today. Okay, and I'd just like to turn it back over to Gail to hopefully bring everything back to the image itself.
Okay, let me ask you now. Do images tell you the truth? Does this tell you the truth about Canada and your roots? If you look, and how many viewpoints are there on an image? Probably as many as there are in this class. This is a glorification of war and a glorification of English Canada. And did you look at the newspaper this morning, or the news on the TV? And did you question those images that you saw? Thank you.